International experts admit the Yemeni crisis is getting complicated as the conflict extends nationwide. The deadly Houthi mines continue to claim lives of innocent Yemenis on a large scale. Joint forces inflict losses and casualties among Houthi rebels in different fronts in Hodeidah. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaza Abdelbei. Yemen problems awaits viable solution that ends the war and restores stability. International experts have admitted that the Yemeni crisis is getting complicated as the conflict extends throughout the country. This report attempts to investigate the different Western experts' perspectives on the Yemeni crisis.
Every single day, Yemenis wonder how to end the war that has torn their country apart for more than 6 years. The talks in Moscow, the most recent prominent attempt to make a breakthrough, wrapped up without any tangible progress. Two linked factors may be standing in the way. The war between Iran-backed Houthi rebels and the Yemeni government is complicated and still raging, and the Houthis' benefactors in Tehran remain locked in a separate but equally thorny set of negotiations with Washington over their own nuclear program. The American delegation had at least gained a better understanding of the complexities in Yemen over the Muscat attempt, and there was a clear sense that they are determined this time to succeed. Right now, it seems the Americans are still in a phase of exploring what each party wants, according to one observer. Tim Linder-King was in Muscat and other regional capitals over the past month. He was joined by the Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan, Senator Chris Murphy, Chairman of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations on Near East, South Asia, Central Asia and counterterrorism. According to Senator Murphy, if there is no real progress in the Iran talks, the Iranians would continue to see Yemen as an opportunity to make mischief against the United States and its allies. Elizabeth Kendall, a Yemen expert at Oxford University, said that the stream of representatives from around the globe passing through Muscat over the past month was in itself a sign of earnest attempts to craft a ceasefire agreement. But she was clear that a political agreement would only be the first step, and just like the politics behind it, the war itself has become incredibly complicated. Reaching a deal will be extremely difficult but not impossible, she said. The greater challenge will be translating any deal into peace on the ground. That may well be impossible currently. As the talks took place in Oman, Yemen's civil war raged across the border. The fiercest fighting now is over control of the oil-rich region of Ma'rib. Violence continues, with thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire. But Ma'rib is just one of many fronts in the war, and Professor Kendall said that the desperate nature of the forces now engaged in fighting will make ending the conflict more difficult. There are dozens of militias and dozens of active fronts. The war has polarized regions and kicked off cycles of revenge that can't be stopped just because political elites have reached an agreement, Kendall added. It's possible that Yemen could unravel further, warned Professor Kendall. Whatever the future power balance in Yemen, stability will rely on strong local governance that is representative and uncorrupt. Kendall added the foreign powers negotiating over the future of the impoverished nation should seize every single opportunity to use the momentum of ongoing diplomacy to shore up local institutions in the country. Only then Yemenis will have a chance of getting on with their lives, whether or not the powers that be can settle their differences.
Massam, the mining project, announced that nearly 1,500 Houthi mines were dismantled since the beginning of the current month. The project noted that the mining operation included 14 anti-personnel 834 anti-tank, 646 unexploded devices, and 1 explosive device. The project added that the total mines in Yemen cleared are more than 272,000. In Lahj, to the far south of Yemen, a woman was killed in a mine explosion. Local sources said that the woman, who works as a sheep herder, sustained injuries after mounting on a landmine. She was rushed to the hospital, but all efforts failed to save her life. The sources said that the woman's brother was killed too in a mine explosion 3 years ago. Also, 4 citizens were injured in a mine explosion west of Al-Dala. The explosion occurred in the area between Batar and Al-Mashir. After the explosion, the engineering teams of the National Center for Demining went to the village of Al-Mashir to scan and clear the area. The rebels are planting these mines in an arbitrary way that puts people's lives at risk. Besides that, these mines hamper social and economic development for Yemeni generations. Figures show that the Houthis planted around 1 million landmines in conflict areas and even in areas that are under their control. This report has more on this issue.
For 6 years now, the war has been raging in Yemen, with the Houthi militia seizing the capital Sana'a back in September 2015. This Irani-backed militia has since then been destroying everything in their path: houses, mosques, schools, and government institutions. The Houthi groups have scored the highest record of mine war, missiles, and explosives since they started the war in 2015. They are described as the most skilled group in improvising explosive attacks in the whole world. According to the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, Yemen is the most affected country by mine explosions worldwide. Hundreds of thousands of mines have been planted in large areas of the Yemen land. About 30% of the country's infrastructure has been destroyed by the bombing. The mine explosions has caused the death of more than 10,000 civilians, including children, women, and elders. In the Taz government of southwestern Yemen, Abdelwahid Hiba Akid, who lives with his family in a village called Yakhtil, has lost his legs during a mine explosion. Abdelwahid words, "Till now, I can't believe what happened. I was with a friend in Makha. We didn't hurt anyone. We didn't do anything. We were just working in the farm and helping our families until the mine exploded." Abdelwahid used to help his family at work, but now he totally depends on them as he's completely unable to move after being exposed to a very strong mine explosion. Abdelwahid wasn't the only case. The Houthi attacks and mine explosions have destroyed many lives and families in Yemen, leaving the citizens with no safe place to go to.
A new human rights report accused Houthi rebels of starving populations in their control areas as a way to ensure their dominance. The report, issued by Muwatna organization, added that the rebels blocked civilians from access to food and water despite knowing children's life-threatening need for both. Muwatna report documented Houthis' violations against humanitarian work in Sada and their planting of landmines in Taz, which prevented people's access to their livelihoods. The human rights organization stressed that 216 incidents in blocked civilian access to humanitarian aid. The incidents were recorded in Houthi-controlled areas within the period between March 2015 and March 2021. To Hodeidah, a number of Houthi rebels were killed and wounded in 4 fighting fronts. A military media of the joint forces announced that the rebels directed their mortar and gun machines towards the fronts of Al-Khamsin al-Saleh, the 16th kilometer, and Al-Fazza. Responding to Houthi fires, the joint forces targeted rebels with direct fires and managed to silence the sources of those fires. People in Houthi-controlled areas are still suffering from the hard conditions of war and life. Those displaced families to the south of Hodeidah are striving to secure their living in the light of merciless conditions in Yemen by the Houthi rebellion. More on the hard conditions of displaced people is in the following report.
A tragic reality in the city of Hais, south of Hodeidah. Inside this open yard where a number of displaced families by the Houthi militia live. In this modest house built of straw, the citizen Abdu Hudairi lives a story of displacement, paying a heavy bill of oppression and pain. A fire and then a flash of lighting made him lose his son, two accidents that El-Khudairi was exposed to within 3 years. The first, a Houthi bullet that burned his entire house, and the other recently was a divine destiny, as his child Hamid was playing with his friends under the raindrops. A child died, Hamid was injured, and another child was injured by a thunderbolt. The picture here seems clear and more expressive than words. In this house that El-Khudairi took as a temporary alternative that lacks the most basic necessities of life. None of the humanitarian organization turned to him to provide him with a shelter that would pay for him and his family members these disasters. This is how the situation has become with many of the displaced people living a life full of betrayal.
Their human situation is very hard, because they live in houses built from straw. The Houthis deported them and they came to us here. They didn't find a place to live in, so they came to this yard. They suffer from rain, wind and the sun. All of that is over their heads. Many times officials came to them and took photos, but they didn't do anything.
The suffering of displacement and tragedy is almost non-stop in the village of Al-Akash, south of Hais, and it is a picture that sums up the suffering and tragedy of the devouring human being, which the displaced are suffering, but their lives are getting more and more difficult due to the lack of the most basic necessities of life and the continuous targeting of their areas.
The U.S. mission to Saudi Arabia denounced Houthi recent attacks on the eastern side of the kingdom. The American mission said that targeted civilians is illegal and unacceptable and can prolong the conflict in Yemen. The mission urged Houthi rebels again to immediately halt these attacks and start working to reach a peaceful and diplomatic solution. Meanwhile, Houthis in the last couple of days launched rockets and drones targeting the southern and eastern parts of Saudi Arabia, causing damage in a commercial plane and wounding civilians. Coming next, Safer, the aged oil tanker, is a nightmare floating in the Red Sea.
ثالثتي على منطقة الروضة استهدف الأطفال الأبرياء اللي يلعبوا في الشارع. بيدعي للسلام يقول له السلام يقتل أطفالنا يقتل أطفالنا الأبرياء.
أنا قلت افتجعت ولا أقول معي واحد صاروخ ثاني. طلعت البيت حقنا. أنا ألعب أنا وأصحابي والصاروخ انطرح.
Welcome back. Yemeni Minister of Water and Environment warned from a possible environmental catastrophe due to Safer oil tanker in the Red Sea. During the UN Minister Conference on Environment in Geneva, the Minister Tawfiq al-Shargabi said that the oil tanker that lurks in the water in front of Al-Hudaydah port will have environmental, humanitarian, and economic negative consequences on Yemen and the neighboring countries. The minister added that the solution for the Safer tanker problem is not difficult, allowing the UN technical team to reach the tanker in order to discharge its load, which is refused by Houthi rebels for 6 years. Al-Sharbagi called on the international community to act in order to prevent an imminent disaster. A disaster is looming in the Red Sea unless the international community rises up to its obligations. The international community should take a firm stand and ask Houthi rebels to let the technical teams evaluate the situation and discharge the load. More on the potential threat of this tanker is within this report.
Time is ticking, but there is yet no foreseeable solution or even action to end the imminent catastrophe. 60 kilometers to the north of the Yemeni seaport of Hudaydah, west of Yemen, and in the open waters of the Red Sea, the lurking Safer oil tanker, a floating oil vessel moored off the Yemeni's coast and permanently anchored at the same location for more than 30 years. Despite being a good wealth for the people of Yemen, it can be a looming hell too. The floating vessel owned by the national oil company, was used prior to the escalation of conflict in 2015 to store and export oil from fields around Maghreb. Now, however, Houthis are in control of both the waters around and the ship within. The all Yemeni hellish treasure, unfortunately, holds a disastrous future with nearly 1.1 million barrels of oil inside Safer. The aging tanker, according to the United Nations, hasn't undergone regular maintenance since the escalation of conflict between the legitimate government and the Houthi rebels. Left unchecked, the tanker awaits the risk of leaking, exploding, or catching fire. A spill from the ship would have catastrophic environmental and humanitarian consequences, with severe impact on the Red Sea ecosystems, on which almost 30 million people depend. The livelihoods of the fishing communities would collapse. If a fire erupts on Safer, more than 8.4 million people could be exposed to harmful pollutants. The worst case scenario would lead to the closure of the seaport of Hodeidah, which means a soaring of prices and life-threatening cut of basic humanitarian aids to millions in Yemen.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 52 new cases of the COVID-19 in 8 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 30 cases were recorded in Hadramaut, 8 in Ma'rib, 4 in Aden, 4 in Al Bayda, 2 in Lahj, 2 in Shabwa, 1 in Taz, and 1 in Al Dala. Also 4 deaths were recorded, plus 21 recovered cases. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 8,101, including 1,523 deaths and 4,982 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. International experts admit the Yemeni crisis is getting complicated as the conflict extends nationwide. The deadly Houthi mines continue to claim lives of innocent Yemenis on a large scale. Joint forces inflict losses and casualties among Houthi rebels in different fronts in Hodeidah. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.